You ready?
Yes.
All right, we are back.
Let's just do this. We are back. Yes. Applause.
Welcome to the Which Way Is Up show. I am Scott.
I am Michi.
And we are back for another episode.
Episode 3 now?
Episode 3. Officially our 4th recording. I don't think I have to keep saying that though, but episode 3, definitely stepping it up as far raising the bar, accepting the challenges that is coming along with remaining consistent with recording our podcast and becoming more structured.
Yes.
I think is the right word as far as the time that we spend recording and how we are breaking it down into segments and just the audio editing and all of that, and it's been fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background that text that just
like that text that's not even on vibrate or on mute.
Background.
Don't you just hate when people don't mute their phones or turn off their phones in meetings?
So rude. But that like the editing, we spend a lot of time recording, but there's so much more that goes into it, and in terms of structure, we forgot to share our presence with people. Like, if they want to hear us, where can they find us?
Right. So you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at WWIU Show. And we are also on YouTube at WWIU Show, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I said YouTube. We said Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and I think that's about it for now. And I think that's all that's really necessary for now. Unless we go Hollywood with this, then we're gonna have to,
We said no red carpet.
I know we did say that, but we're not in charge really all the time, so we don't know how this is gonna go. Hopefully, no red carpets though, because I'm not with that. I should mention that this is not Fish Taco Friday. Part of our growth and raising the bar is to acknowledge that Friday night just might not be too good for us. I started a second job since we started this podcast, and because that's the way the capitalist system is set up, where it is required that I spend less time sleeping and less time doing things that I enjoy.
Yeah.
So here we are on a Sunday. Right, exactly. So here we are on a Sunday afternoon brunch time, more rested, well rested, hopefully better prepared. And if not, you're just going to get what we got.
That's it. And you're like it.
So as usual, we have, we discussed during the week, we kind of throw topics out there that we are interested in discussing towards the end of the week when we do the actual recording of the show. But usually shit just happens every day,
all the time,
which steers us in different directions and creates some type of reaction and emotion and feelings, which leads us to the Rittenhouse verdict. Which Rittenhouse.
I saw a couple memes where they were referring to him as Rittenhouse.
I mean, that's clever. I don't know if that's going to help anything. It is clever though. That's usually something that the right does. They have a great way of like taking words like the demon rats and just turning these phrases into something that's like linked to the devil or whatever. They're good at that. That's how you can tell who they are. So Rittenhouse trial. This is something that you and I haven't really discussed with each other, but we've been like following it, or not every single event that takes place or everything that's said in the trial, but basically just keeping an eye on what was going on because it's important, and there's also the other trial. There's many other trials, but the other trial that's got a lot of focus and attention right now is the trial in Georgia for Ahmaud Arbery's killers. Right. And what comes out of, so my feeling is, so anybody that doesn't know, Kyle Rittenhouse is the 17-year-old white boy with the baby face and a big old assault rifle that drove 21 miles from his home state of Illinois into Wisconsin to the town or city or township or whatever it is that they call it of Kenosha, where there was a movement for Black Lives demonstrations taking place at the time. So most people know what happened. Just to clear some things up, because, I'm really big on the misinformation thing, something that I fell into. Apparently it's looking like his mom didn't drive him with the rifle, all the way. Like, apparently he was dropped off ahead of time, and he went to
it's like his father lives there.
Yeah, and he got some friends or associates or whatever. So, because the whole thing was like a lot of, in my mind, it kind of like judging his mom, like according to what my mom would have done, as far as, letting me out of the house with a rifle or driving me somewhere. And I was like, you know what? Like, I could just picture myself with, let's not even say like having a rifle across my shoulder. Let's say I had it like put in a duffel bag, like it wasn't assembled yet, but I had a big old duffel bag, and I'm walking out of the house, and there's usually like 2 or 3 questions my mother have. The first one is, where you going? Right? The second one is,
what's in the bag?
No. That's coming though. But definitely, you're already on it. You're already on it. The second one would be, who's going to be there? Right? That's a question. Who's going to be there? And the third one is, what's in the bag?
Yeah. Why are you taking that bag?
Right. Wait, what's in the bag? Right. And what I can say with certainty is that no matter how I answer that question, my mother's still going to say, let me see.
Yeah, no.
Let me see what's in the bag. No. So, but it turns out that it seems that his mother didn't drive him there with the rifle and all that. So we can move past that.
But even still, when Columbine happened, I remember, and that was a long time ago. So I just recall being just a couple years older than these kids that did the whole Columbine thing.
Right.
And, one of the things that came out of the report was that when they went to their home, like, they found all kinds of, like, guns and whatnot, like, on their dresser in their bedroom and stuff. And I'm like, if my mother saw a gun on my dresser, like, I would, like, yeah, it was just crazy.
Well, definitely different cultures. I mean, I guess, there's definitely some families and some parts of this country that embrace the gun culture more than others. And unfortunately embrace the violence more than others, So his mother apparently didn't drive him with the rifle, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't embrace the gun culture, and that's not part of their family. And they don't, it's not to say that they don't have an arsenal in their basement, because we don't know. But, my whole thing with this is that, the Rittenhouse acquittal, in a sense, re-legitimizes white vigilantism and violence against social movements in this country. If you recall, a few weeks ago, I mentioned how in this country, there's a history of social movements being physically crushed in this country, and that's what I'm speaking to now. When we think about vigilantism, first of all, the definition. Let's get the definition out there. Law enforcement undertaken without legal authority by a self-appointed group of people, right? Which is going to take me into how white privilege often evolves into white vigilantism. I was going to say evangelicalism, whatever. Vigilantism. Some people are going to say, well, this is not about race, or why are you going to make this about race? There is no other form of vigilantism in this country other than white vigilantism. Like, it just isn't. If you think about it, if you think about the self-appointed group of people, we're talking primarily about white people and primarily about white males, right, in this country. So it takes me back to the history of the citizens' arrest in this country, which goes back to the slave patrol. With the first forming of the slave patrol, which in a sense required, or reminded everyday citizens that they had a duty to help apprehend escaped slaves. So obviously this is not black people that are given this authority, because it's kind of set up to hunt them down, So that right there already starts pointing you in the direction of how vigilantism goes and who that self-appointed group of people are. White privilege convinces certain people that to this day that they still have the right to deputize themselves, right? To give themselves that authority to stop question, and detain fellow citizens. Like how many people really believe they could do that? How many people actually have the phrase citizens arrest in their vocabulary? Like how many people think about that, you know? So to be able to stop, question, detain, and ultimately murder other people, this is all that comes with the belief that you have the authority to conduct a citizen's arrest. And at the very least, if everything I just mentioned is too extreme, at least the thought and the belief that you have the authority to investigate people who look suspicious, who or what seems to be a threat, or people that are acting strange. And mind you, this is according to the personal biases of the person that's making these judgments.
Right. And so a lot of this came up, you know, a couple years ago when you had, what was it, barbecue Betty and potato salad Patty and like water Wanda, you know, where like, you know, there's a little girl selling water, you know, like for whatever reason, like the same reason that a child would set up like a lemonade stand. And she's calling the city because, you know, she asked if the kid had a permit. And it's like, why do you feel the need to enforce city code? Right. You know what I mean?
Against a child.
Yeah.
Against a child.
Like what is it? And it's this very, you know, this thing that dates back centuries. And so they take it upon themselves. You know, somebody else sees people barbecuing in a part of the park where no barbecuing is allowed. Again, what do you know, like, why do you feel like it's your duty?
Or the neighborhood watch.
Right.
Self-appointed neighborhood watch person.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, when I first moved into the neighborhood, which I've always been, you know, I mean, I only grew up a couple blocks from here. But I remember seeing in one of the neighborhood groups on Facebook, somebody's like, watch your kids when you're taking them to school in the morning because there's homeless people sleeping in the park. And I'm like, and they're sleeping? Right. Yes. So why do you have to watch your kids if the homeless people are sleeping? Right. Like, you know, are they like wielding guns and knives and hurling them at you? No. And then, you know, again, I'm like, and once again, like, why is it your job to enforce that people can't sleep in the park? You're taking the kid to school anyway. You know what I mean? It's not, and like, is it a terrible thing for your child to see that, yes, there are homeless people there are people that are less fortunate? Instead of shielding your child from that, why don't you ask them, what can we do to help? You know, like, but anyway. Or
you know what? I would even say, you know, it would be important to get an understanding of what my child thinks about the homeless person sleeping there. And if I need to offer a better perspective, you know, as being a parent, you know, because they may have taken in some information from somewhere which could be a negative source or misinformed source, just to be fair, neighborhood watch groups, associations are not necessarily a bad thing, right? Yeah. Especially when there's a group that have come together and they have official meetings and minutes for the meetings, and they have debates and they take votes and things like that. Right. We're talking more about the self-appointed person that takes it upon themselves to watch over the neighborhood according to their standards. Because when you have a group, then you have other perspectives, and hopefully it's a diverse group that can, you know, kind of point out things that are wrong with some of our personal bias and things like that, and kind of help each other understand why that person doesn't necessarily look suspicious or why they're not acting strange, you know. So yeah, just to, because this is really focused on the self-appointed neighborhood watcher, or the person that's officially deputizing themselves, which includes arming yourself, you know, also, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's not a requirement, but it just seems to be something that's really popular amongst white vigilantism. Another thing about white vigilantism is that it has a history of colluding with law enforcement. And so when I say that, you know, we go back to the history, but just to think about the Georgia case right now, the Ahmaud Arbery killer's trial, where apparently one of those guys, or the one that really initiated this whole lynching, I'm going to call it, of Ahmaud Arbery was former law enforcement.
Yes.
Right, if I'm not mistaken. And so they did. This was something that none of us knew about until the video surfaced. Right. So this was pretty much a done deal because it wasn't like the local law enforcement didn't know. Like apparently the prosecutor or the DA did know, and they also knew the person that was leading this charge and this lynching, and they kind of just did the whole wink and nod thing, like yeah, don't worry about it. You did the right thing or whatever. And then once the video surfaced and the public got wind of it, really just tore them apart as far as how they were just trying to like nip this in the bud and just keep it moving, just as if nothing never happened. And that's part of the mindset of the person that deputizes themselves. There's no fear of prosecution. Because if, I don't know if you've paid attention, you heard this statement, and actually Rittenhouse said it when he was testifying. I did nothing wrong. Right? I've heard that a lot. Trump used to say it a lot. I did nothing wrong. They're not saying I'm innocent, but they're saying I did nothing wrong, which goes to the mindset that what I'm doing is in compliance with the norms of this country. Right? So then let's say if there is an arrest, because we got video cameras now and we're able to start some shit about these injustices, but then so there's an arrest. So then the next step, whether there's going to be an indictment, that's another hurdle, and then once you get to the indictment part and there's going to be a trial set up, there's the tendency to get an all white jury or mostly white jury, which the defendants or the defense in these situations, this is what they're looking for, right? Because that's pretty much a jury of their peers. And you'll have 11 or 12, 10, 11 or 12, whatever the amount of white people on that jury, that there's a good likelihood that they come from the culture of self-deputizing themselves. So they get it. They get it. They understand that there's really nothing wrong with, stopping, detaining, questioning our fellow citizens and ultimately having to shoot them, regardless if they're armed or not. Maybe they didn't comply. Here you are, an average citizen, but here I am thinking that I have the authority that you must comply to or comply with. And then we get to not guilty verdicts, which is also common. And I'm also talking about law enforcement situations which are parallel to these white vigilantism, like we mentioned the collusion. So when there's a not guilty verdict like there was this past Friday, it tends to reinforce everything that we just mentioned. Right. All these thoughts, this culture, this belief. And from the vibe that I'm getting, like this Friday is like has become like a national holiday for white nationalists right now. Like it's open season. Because there, as far as the Rittenhouse case was concerned, that particular incident didn't involve the killing of black people or any people of color, right? So there's a loophole for them to try to work through to say that this is not about race. There were white people, and this is what they're doing. Because I went on a little counter troll action, after the verdict, because I'm getting the vibe. I'm seeing where they're already going with this, and it's like, this ain't about race. How could, and it's not even like they're saying it like, so matter of fact, like, how could this be about white supremacy when it was white people killed? Like, where's the logic in that? And I was like, all right, just give me a second and I'm going to give you the logic. So I've been combating them, and it's first important to remember, because I know some people that are listening have that same mindset where it's like, why is it got to be about race? That makes me uncomfortable. And you might not be saying it out loud, but just in case you're thinking that way, it's important to remember that the people that were killed, and it was 3 people shot, 2 people died. And it's important to remember that they were there because they were showing up to support Black Lives Matter, or particularly, the incident that spurred that whole. That whole it was a protest. It was a protest because of the shooting of Jacob Blake by police, who got shot 7 times, 7, not 17, 7 times in his back. He survived. However surviving looks like for him after being shot 7 times in the back, and most likely I believe he is paralyzed. So, and this country has a history of the white power structure, white supremacy, pushing back on white people that cross that line,
right,
and go and support Black lives, go and support civil rights movements, and that's the first thing I kept saying. The first thing I kept saying to them was, I go Google Andrew Goodman and Michael Henry Schwerner, and those were the two young civil rights activists that were that turned up missing along with James Earl Chaney in 1963, where there was a whole big search. FBI came in looking for them. And then ultimately, I'm not sure, but I think it was like several weeks later, they found all their bodies. And it turned out that they were actually arrested by the local sheriff and released into the hands of the Klan. Talking about that collusion, right? We're talking about the collusion. So when those people were missing during those weeks, if my memory of history serves correctly, not only was this a national story, but there were a lot of people headed down there, civil rights workers, even more than were already headed down there to begin with. The FBI eventually came into the state, which they hate that, and I'm sure that people at the time, even at the time when Jim Crow and everything was pretty much mainstream, they were saying, well, how can this be anything to do with race? Right. There were 2 white people killed. Yeah. And I think the whole situation and that staple in history pretty much speaks for itself.
Right. No, yeah. And, for me, the outrage in all this just came not so much from, I can't believe it. It absolutely made sense when I heard the verdict, but then again, I go back to our history. I know our history that allow for something like this to happen, and more so for the pattern to continue all over. I saw a lot of stuff on social media where people had like pictures of like Dylan Roof, Kyle, Rittenhouse, right, George Zimmerman, and they're like armed, arrested. But then there's like, Trayvon Martin and, Elijah, oh gosh, what's his last name, from Colorado, and all the Breonna Taylor, and they're unarmed.
Tamir Rice, little boy, with a toy gun.
Floyd, all unarmed, but all murdered. So there is a pattern, and so once again, people are like, oh, it doesn't always have to be about race. Then that's the argument there, and I'm like, okay, but if it's not about race, then what's with the pattern? So like we're looking at the same thing, why there is a pattern of, even if you're not Black or Latino, if you side with them or if you, stand up for the equity, then you're risking your life too, So it's so much to still unpack surrounding this. Until people really, for me, the biggest thing out of this too is, and I think the reason why it's so frustrating is because at this point, and like someone that we know who's very active, in terms of like racial equality and stuff, has said it before, like Black people are sick and tired of explaining, why these things are issues, why they continue to ask for, what they're asking for. And it's because white privilege is not a Black problem. It's a white problem. And until white people start to address it, it's always going to exist. But they don't see a problem with it because they're not impacted. Because every time they go shoot some people and go to court, they get off, So right, it's like, it's frustrating.
I think something you just touched on too is important, where in terms of white people and allies, now it's different for white people that grow up alongside Black people, other people, in urban neighborhoods or whatever, that it's pretty much a no-brainer. But for someone that may not know or have personally witnessed or have firsthand experience, but decide that they want to be an ally and they want to be part of, pushing back on this white power structure, it's important for them to understand how it's about race. And let's say, because it's not uncommon for these people to travel to where the demonstrations are. And it's important to understand what exactly is going on, what's the situation, what's the history behind it, and what's going on the ground right now, which is something Rittenhouse didn't do, right? His thing was, let me grab my AR-15, right? And let me poke my chest out. And let me go there. Let me go and protect property, supposedly, and maybe maybe do a little intimidating while I'm protecting the property or whatever. But I'm not going to go back on him. But I'm just saying where it's important for us to not dismiss how this is about race and how dangerous it is because it's about race for people that may not understand and get involved and find themselves in situations where they might be on the other side of the barrel of the gun of a Rittenhouse or a Dylan Roof or whatever, just because they want to do the right thing and they want to have equality and they want to stop seeing unarmed black people and people that are supporting them dead in the street and without any type of consequences. So what can we do? Because I've noticed that a lot of people are complaining about people that are talking about these things and offering no solutions. And offering solutions is not an easy thing. But I had to dig a little bit to see at least what I can come up with. And the solution is always to continue to talk about it. Right. Continue to expose, continue to bring awareness to the people that are trying to remain disengaged, that don't want to deal with it. But this is part of our life. This is part of our society right now. And there are people that benefit politically from your disengagement, right? Absolutely. So definitely continue to do it. If you have a social media following, if you have a podcast, whatever it is, make sure you whatever you're spreading is from coming from an informed place. Not just carelessly liking and sharing anything that sounds good or feels good on social.
Responsible with your sharing.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing that I want to add to that, which was something I was listening to on another podcast, is I get it. I'm pretty much tired of hearing that we got to vote as everybody else. That's not going to say that I'm not going to vote, but I do realize that voting in itself is the bare minimum. Right. That's the bare minimum because I've seen people post on election day, with their sticker talking about I did my part. And it was like, you just got started. So another thing that I want to bring up that was brought to my attention is that, a lot of these elections have down ballot races where there are prosecutors and sheriffs running. And some places they're running unopposed, right? And it's important that we understand the mentality and the record of these prosecutors and these judges, not just on matters dealing with race, but dealing with matters dealing with drug use and domestic violence, and because their viewpoint is very important to how these things get addressed and whether or not there'll be consequences for situations like this going forward.
Something else that I read this week, and it was just more like a comment, it was really talking about how, talking about things that we need to do beyond voting. And for me, it's always been about just really being in the community. And I know not everybody's cut out for that kind of work, but that's one of the reasons why I never left the town. I just there's work to do here. I love where I'm from. There's work to do here. I'm willing to do the work. And so I'm going to stay out there doing it. And so the comment was along the lines of, we do vote, but these politicians aren't doing anything for us. And we really need to start forming community. We need to start knowing who our neighbors are, looking out for each other, because honestly, when we call 911 and they don't show up, when we need a politician and they don't show up, when we need whatever it is that we need, sometimes all we have is each other. And it's not that we want to let them off the hook either, but it's more along the lines of, it's a little bit more empowering, and then people really start to see that we can do this, we got this. And not that we're letting them off the hook for what they're responsible for, but if we can organize this way to make things happen, then we can organize to have voice and to make things happen.
Right.
You know, so that was just something else that, you know, how, you know, people of color, Black, brown people, like, we really need to, this whole mentality of, you know, we gotta do better so we can all leave the hood. No, do better and give back to the hood, you know, like, and
that's a big conversation now.
It is. So I'm just gonna leave it there.
I want to read a piece that was written and presented in the San Francisco Chronicle by Kat Brooks, who is an actress, a playwright, an organizer, executive director of the Justice Team Network, and co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project, and co-host of Upfront on KPFA. He's got a lot going on here. Yeah. Great piece following the verdict of Rittenhouse. She sums up her piece by saying, because Rittenhouse was defending white America against Black Lives Matter protesters and wholly imagined dangers of anti-fascists, his acquittal no doubt reified his status as a hero to many and will further radicalize some of the most dangerous elements in American life. We should all be concerned about the acts of violence that will follow against Black bodies and our allies. Be clear that white supremacists and others have been watching this trial closely to see what they can get away with. They were told that as long as they can prove that they were scared for their lives, just like police, white vigilantes can kill with impunity. Americans should be ashamed. I imagine there will be protests. People will take to the streets. Windows will maybe be broken in anger as these protests grow across the nation. Whether or not that actually happens, I imagine the Kyle Rittenhouses of the world will be there to defend. And they now know that they are free to do it with the barrel of a gun. This is Miss Kat Brooks. That is not the whole article. We will definitely put the link to the article in the description. But that is the summary of her article, and I think says everything that needs to be said.
Absolutely.
What you got for me?
Moving on. What I have for you? Well, you know, you may not know this, or maybe you do. We actually posted something on our Instagram page.
At WWIU show Instagram.
At WWIU show on Instagram and Facebook.
Yes.
Which way is up? This is that 2-minute commercial break.
Right. With no sponsors.
With no sponsors.
We'll sponsor ourselves.
Oh my goodness, we have fun doing this.
Yeah,
you guys have to know this. We have fun doing this. So Friday was November 19th, and typically that is the day that many celebrate the, in quotes, discovery of Puerto Rico. And so, you know, there are a lot of people that are posting, okay, oh yeah, we're celebrating. The discovery, in quotes, of Puerto Rico is not something that I celebrate. It's something that I choose to just celebrate Puerto Rico on that day, but I celebrate Puerto Rico every day, right?
Right.
But there are a lot of like local leaders that will have events, discovery of Puerto Rico. I myself performed at an event on Thursday with the group with Segunda Quimbamba at NJCU, my alma mater, and they were celebrating the discovery of Puerto Rico. When I was a student at NJCU, I actually sat on the committee, and I was part of the group that organized that event. And we had changed it to a celebration of Puerto Rican history. And it was typically a week. And then at one point, as the Latino community in the area started to grow, it became a celebration of 3 cultures that are like cousins, right? Which is the Puerto Rican community, the Cuban community, and the Dominican community. And so then we made it a month-long celebration. But yeah, so this weekend is a celebration of Puerto Rico. And so you've always and recently you said that, you know, you have me on here because you want me to break this down. I myself just started I want to say maybe like in my 20s, once I was in college, really digging into the history of Puerto Rico. I knew Puerto Ricanness through music and culture and food, and like family celebrations. That was the extent of like my grasp of our culture. It wasn't until I got into college that I started reading more on the history and understanding more in terms of like the political pawn that Puerto Rico is to this day. So, and for those that don't know, I'm just going to throw out a couple things. So 1898.
Give it to him.
1898, Puerto Rico becomes a U.S. colony. And a lot of people will tell you, oh no, it's a territory. What is a territory? According to the UN, there's not supposed to be any more territories. So it's a colony, but that's neither here nor there. In 1917, with the Jones Act, Puerto Ricans become U.S. citizens. And so you're talking about 20 years later. By then, there was a lot happening on the island where landowners were... Big banks come in, set up. Landowners are seeking mortgages with these companies or taking loans, what have you. Just like big banks do, you know, they screw all these people over, and now farmers are losing their land. And so now that's prime for U.S. corporations to start coming in, and you know, and all these things were set up. One of the biggest criminal companies is Domino Sugar. Domino Sugar went in, and just all those sugar plantations that, you know, people were losing, they were just scooping them all up. They were scooping them all up because all these farmers were in debt, and they basically took probably pennies on the dollar, you know, and so Domino Sugar came in and just, you know, and then of course started paying people less. So really kept them. So now what happens as a result? Now people are forced to leave the island because they have to find work. You know, they're trying to make a better life. So now 20 years, so 1898 becomes a U.S. colony. 20 years later, they become U.S. citizens. About 20 years after that, now they start coming into the United States. So maybe like 30 years after that, early 50s, you have a large influx of Puerto Ricans settling mostly in the New York area. There's a joke because, you know, Puerto Rico is an archipelago. So there, you know, it's like a whole bunch of little islands. So there's actually a joke that the biggest island of Puerto Rico is Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
because you have so many Puerto Ricans that settled there, Chicago, mostly in those areas. So you have about 3.5 million Puerto Ricans on the island, but you have almost 6 million on the mainland USA. So there's even more Puerto Ricans here than on the island.
Right.
And so that's the diaspora. And it's such a unique experience, the diaspora, because when we're here, we're Puerto Rican and we're proud, you know, because we have that capability of going back and forth so often. It's easy for us to kind of keep and maintain our culture. But at the same time, we go to the island and we're gringos. We're Yankees. We're not, you know, we're not Puerto Rican. So what makes it worse is that the first couple of generations were forced to assimilate, often by their own. My own family members, I have cousins that were born over there, came here as babies, basically. And as they were growing up, even though my aunts and uncles didn't speak English, they were forcing their children to only speak English. And I often wondered what communication was like in that house. But now I have cousins that they speak Spanish pretty well because they always heard it, but it's not their first language. Their children speak no Spanish whatsoever. Right. So you see how already all it took was one generation to basically obliterate. What you're finding now is that there are a lot of Puerto Ricans that are reclaiming their culture, and that is not far removed from having experienced what they experienced here in the, you know, coming in the 50s, civil rights movement in the 60s. You know, we read this in the Young Lords history book. Yes. You know, having experienced like 10 years of, you know, seeing how their parents were treated at work, in neighborhoods, how they themselves were treated in schools, you know, because we're talking about children. And so now they're, you know, as teens and as young adults become involved in organizations like the Young Lords organization because, you know, they saw what was happening. Hurricane Maria hits, and I see another resurgence of people reclaiming their roots. And I think it's because there's been so much corruption on the island. And it was the straw that broke the camel's back. The way that everything was just managed, it exposed the inefficiencies, the inconsistency, the lack of consideration for people on behalf of the politicians on the island. And so I think at this point, what we're seeing is that in reclaiming, and I speak for myself, but I know a lot of other Puerto Ricans that are in this space have been in this space for a long time. But even like the ones who have been in this space, you know, I'm speaking about people in my generation. Maybe they've been in this space for a long time.
Right.
Now I'm just kind of coming into, we're changing the storyteller. We're not changing the story. Mm-hmm. We're changing the storyteller. So the Puerto Rican narrative for a very long time was told from the perspective of the colonizer, as is the majority of, like, I think every person, right. You know, is in the perspective of the colonizer. We did, in Puerto Rican history, they did manage to keep the Jíbaro story going, which is like the countryman, you know, because again, that was palatable for the colonizer. And so now what we're seeing is a resurgence because people still feel like there's something missing. And again, I can speak for myself. There's still something missing. There's part of my story, of our story that's missing. And that's the Black story, you know? Puerto Rican history is Black history. And in my allyship, I need to know what that side of the story is, what that piece of the story is, because it may not be my story, but it is part of our story. There's about a year ago, I was having a conversation with an old college friend of mine, probably one of the most proudest Puerto Rican men that I know. And so we were talking about, you know, some of the history and just kind of going back and forth. Very knowledgeable in Puerto Rican history. Growing up, always had that connection to the islands. Was one of those kids that would spend the whole summer out there. You know, right. I didn't get to have that experience, but he did. And so I was talking about, you know, what I do in bomba music. And he said to me, yeah, but you know, that's not our experience. I said to him, yeah, I know that's not my experience. I know that wasn't my parents' experience. I know that wasn't my great-grandparents' experience. But that doesn't mean that I don't listen to that story. That doesn't mean that I don't.
It was someone's experience.
Exactly. And we're all Puerto Ricans. You know what I'm saying? So whatever is happening in my community, that's my community, you know? So, I can't, you know, just ignore it because that's not my story. No, it's again, we're not trying to change the story. We're trying to tell it from a different perspective. A lot of this has now what has come into play for me is my decolonization journey. As I've been going through that, understanding how immensely colonized the Puerto Rican community is. Ooh. I saw an event that took place on the discovery of Puerto Rico, and it was just, there was like one story being told there in that room at that celebration. And we've already heard that story a million times. It's tired. It's played out. Everybody knows that story, you know? It's time for us to evolve and to, you know, like draw open the curtain and let's just see the whole picture, because honestly, it's really tired. And this is something that really, between, you know, my exposure to bomba, my involvement in bomba music, seeing what happened during Hurricane Maria, that feeling of desperation, of not being able to do anything. My involvement with the Puerto Rican Day Parade Committee here in Jersey City, as it took it back to a very grassroots initiative where, again, there was a reclaiming. Very specifically, the vision was to bring the festival back to the heart of the city. They took the festival and did it all the way down at Exchange Place, where there were all these restrictions. You can't have this, you can't have that, only so many this, only so many that. And it lost like its sense of, you know what I mean? Like, and it was just, and so we were like, we're taking that festival out of there. We're bringing it back to the heart of the city where it's accessible to everyone. And it just felt like home again. So, I just broke down a lot. But again, when all this to say that if you're going to talk about the discovery of Puerto Rico, I want to start hearing more stories about the Black experience. I want to hear more stories about the cimarrón, which was the escapee, the one that, and there are a lot of songs in Bomba that talk about very specific events that happened, and like rebellions, and there's a whole book on like different, rebellions that happened among the enslaved. But like that's what I want. I want to hear people discovering new things about their Puerto Ricanness. I want to hear people discovering how the diaspora is an entirely different experience of Puerto Ricanness, and how we can embrace each other as opposed to making that, something that divides us. I would love to see where more diasporicans, as I call them, are discovering the island, especially at a time where we're needed. I've said this to you before. I think we should create a registry. Whoever wants statehood on the island can switch places with someone here that wants to go work in Puerto Rico, become either like a local politician or but like who's going to work towards independence and a sovereign state for the island. It's a pipe dream, but you never know. Yeah, I could keep going, but again, we're going to go for different segments of Puerto Rico. And
well, that was a good introduction to,
thanks.
Which was, all that we can hope to cover in one episode. Yeah. If not, this would be 3 hours long. Just, a couple things taken away from everything that you just presented, everything that you just dropped. First of all, let me correct you. I didn't, your history and knowledge and passion for Puerto Rico is not why we're doing the podcast. That was what drew me to you to have these type of conversations long time ago. Like the podcast just made it more live and interesting, and I got you with your notes now, and now you're breaking down a presentation. That's my type of shit right there. I enjoy that. So, but I had always recognized your pride for being Puerto Rican and for the island itself, but as I've begun to investigate and start to unlearn a lot of these, these stories that were given to us and handed down by the colonizer, and in this country, I became aware that it's not just this country. This country is a big, big part of it, but territories and other countries, So, and another thing that I probably didn't mention in our introduction in our pilot episode was that, so I'm half white. My mother's white. My father's Black. So I am mixed race and I have that experience. But I didn't mention that growing up, and even till this day, I have never really been around white people like that. And my time growing up around Black people was more, or I should say, mostly around Black folks was my early childhood. But the rest of my life has been with Puerto Ricans.
You did mention that.
Right. Oh, I did. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then, it's a good time to, mention that again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Reiterate. So, I've gotten, first of all, Puerto Ricans showed me love when I was struggling with being a mixed, being of mixed race where, I didn't know necessarily how I should dress, how I should look, how I should talk. And then I didn't know how to not feel bad about the decisions I made about how I should walk, talk, dress, or whatever. And so I just felt at home, being around, and I'm not just talking about with like my peers, but their parents, right. Where their parents would look at me and be like, why don't you know Spanish? And I'm like, yeah, because I'm not technically, like, I don't want to hear that. You need to know Spanish, you know, and that was like the kind of love that I would get, you know, and the embracing. So once I started to look at history and politics and the stories that have been forgotten or just been suppressed, you know, Puerto Rico, or my experience around my friends that are Puerto Rican, has always kind of come up to me, because I have friends, like you said, every summer go to the island, you know, growing up, you know, they have family out there. You know, I have friends that used to be sent to the island because they start getting in trouble over here. Yeah. And then they wind up sending them back from the island because they get in more trouble on the island or whatever. Mm-hmm. So these are like things that I know from my experience, you know. But one thing I never really heard, and my vibe from you and my vibe from the rest of my friends and other people that I've encountered growing up that are of Puerto Rican descent, is like there's a tremendous amount of pride. You know, as far, you know, as at least of what I've got to experience being in the New York area, in Jersey, being on the mainland, and from what I know of Puerto Ricans on the island itself. But I've never, ever really gotten any information or even made aware when I was younger that there's also another side that's not being told, right? Yeah, and even to this day, where we have social media now, we have podcasts now, people are talking about all type of shit, and people are deconstructing all these lessons and norms that were, you know, we were socialized into. And so now, but even now, I see, and even after the hurricane, right? After Hurricane Maria, a lot of people going to the island, vacationing, right? And I think I made a comment on one of your posts. I forgot what the post was about, but I was like, unfortunately, you'll get more likes and shares if you were just posting a picture of you on the beach in Puerto Rico, right? Oh, yeah. Because that, you know, and so the vibe that I'm getting now is that a lot of people feel that it's important to visit the island, which definitely, of course, you know, especially after, you know, the destruction on top of on the island we're already experiencing prior to Hurricane Maria. But as far as what's really going on right now and how Hurricane Maria made the island more vulnerable, you know, to what's taking place, you know, has piqued my interest even more, where it was like, okay, so a lot of you are not really talking about this, and the pics on the beach look great. And I'm really appreciating the images of Puerto Rican culture, but I really appreciate you because you give me what's going on underneath all of that.
Yeah, thank you. I there are a lot of Puerto Ricans though that are like asleep to it, and especially the ones in the diaspora, because they don't live it. You know, I've always talked about, and I still do. I'm like, oh, you know, when I go live on the island, I know there's going to be a point when I leave here and I'm going to go over there. I already know. I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow, next year, or in 20 years, but...
Sounds like I got a vacation spot.
But one of the things that in this podcast I've been listening to, and... Shout them out. La Brega. You guys got to... Like, it's only like 7 or 8 episodes. I'm still making my way through it, but it's La Brega. And that's actually a saying in Puerto Rico. La Brega means the work that needs to be done, or the thing that needs to be done. And so, you know, like you can ask someone, oh, you know, how you doing? And the response is, en la brega. Like, in other words, I'm in the thick of it. I like that. You know, so I say it all the time. Oh, how you doing? En la brega. Because that's how life is on the island. Nothing can just be. There's a lot of people that go there and they struggle with how things are. This is how things are on the island. It's like, push me, I'm coming, you know. It's part of the island mentality, you know. And I get that, and I love it. It forces you to slow down. And, you know, it's not that serious.
Yeah.
But then there are some times where, yes, it is that serious. Like the fact that there's still, I think it's like hundreds of thousands of homes that still have blue tarps on them since Hurricane Maria. It's been 4 years now, you know? So what's that about? So that's the kind of brega that nobody should have to be in. You know, like it shouldn't be 4 years after a hurricane and you still don't have a roof. You know, it's this is why I will never be the one to judge someone on their Puerto Ricanness, how they choose to celebrate it, exhibit it, feel it, never that. But like, I see you, you know what I'm saying? Like you said, the pictures on the beach are great. You know, where's your picture where you're out in actual Puerto Rico and visiting the local businesses, you know, supporting local artisans, you know, anybody could stay in Old San Juan and, you know, whatever. Like, what are you doing? You know, and I know a lot of people have family out there. So hopefully you're making that conscious effort to go out there, see your family, go back to your hometown and just spend your money there, you know, like give back there. There are a lot that don't have that connection. So then do that here. You know, where's your Puerto Rican community here? And what are you doing at that level?
Part of my curiosity stems from the one time I did go to Puerto Rico, which was, I think it was back in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And I went with my girlfriend at the time, who has family. Her father's over there. Her father is a business owner in the town where they're originally from, and he happens to one of his businesses was a hotel in the town. So that's where we stood. Like, I didn't go to stay in the tourist, you know, spot or whatever, even though we did go on one day to visit Old San Juan and things like that and take the pictures and all that. But a lot of my experience came from in the town over, and, you know, certain festivals and events that are taking place every weekend and things like that, which I've always heard about. But just to be there and experience it and the authenticity of it, as opposed to some generic event that's put on for tourists. You know what I'm saying? In a section that attracts tourists. Right. So I guess I've always had in my mind since that visit that, you know, there's more to the island than just the beach. There's more to the culture than just the beach and the pretty water and the pretty images that are being posted and things like that. So that's probably part of where my curiosity stems from.
I think something else that we get criticized for in a funny kind of way, but also has a background story that is of a political nature, is how people display the Puerto Rican flag in ways that other Latino cultures don't. Like, you know, you will see more Puerto Ricans display their flag in their car than you'll see like Dominicans or Cubans or Argentinians or Colombians,
especially in
like,
the New York, New Jersey area.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Every opportunity we get. And during the parade, they got one on each window in the car and on the antenna, and, you know, there's t-shirts and shorts and sneakers and everything. And so it's been like a joke that Puerto Ricans are obsessed with the flag, but the reason why we're obsessed with the flag is because there was actually a law that went into place, La Ley de la Mordaza, the gag law back in the 50s, that made it illegal to display the Puerto Rican flag.
I did not know that. Wow. I think I heard something about that, but I didn't know there was an official law.
Yes. Wow. And like, people went to jail, and it was because of the Nationalist Party and the Movement for Independence that they put this law into place, and people would go to jail because they displayed a Puerto Rican flag. So I think that law was only in place for about 10 years. 10 years is a long time.
That's a long time, yeah. And
so once it was lifted, it coincided with the very first Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City, and there were flags everywhere because finally we could fly our flag. And so, you know, even something like that, that again, it's a joke almost, there is history behind that. And, you know, now you understand why every opportunity we get, we're going to display our flag, because there was a point where we couldn't. There's a similar story in Bomba. Bomba music was, you know, outlawed for a while on the islands. And if you were caught with bomba drums, they would smash your drums and arrest you for playing bomba music. You know, it's music of resistance. So if it was playing, there was probably trouble coming for the police, you know, and they weren't having it. So that was their way to... So yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to dive in some more, but, you know, I wanted to celebrate the discovery of Puerto Ricanness as we celebrate Puerto Rican history and culture and arts and music. And I'm gonna keep, you know, bringing up little things here and there, and
as you are expected to do. So,
how you feeling?
I feel good.
Okay, good,
I feel good.
Yeah,
I'm trying to ignore these sounds coming from outside. I know that's the difference of doing it this time of day, where people are outside and there's more noises. It's live. It's definitely not gonna, you know, affect the quality of what this. You know, you'll just be able to hear that. You know, we're not in a professional studio and we don't have these rooms soundproof or whatever.
We're in an urban landscape.
Yeah, that as well. That's why you hear the kids playing out front and the screaming and all that, which probably goes to the authenticity of the show itself.
That's it.
You know.
Keep it real.
Before we close on a positive note, because as expected, we touched on some really deep and potentially heart-aching type of stuff.
Yeah.
we just wanted to let everyone know that going forward, being that last week we touched on misinformation and disinformation and media literacy, we decided that going forward we would have a segment for disinformation awareness, which will be taking a little piece out of things that I've researched and that I've been learning about the topic of media literacy and sharing it with everyone that can help everyone pretty much improve their own awareness, raise their own awareness and improve on ways that they can minimize themselves from falling into this trap. With this misinformation, which is very important. So we'll be starting that next week. So on a positive note,
and this is local news, but I'm sure it's happening everywhere. So if we have any listeners that are in other areas, this goes back to something I was saying before about just really being in your community. Tap into your community. A lot of times we get so angry about the things that happen, and we're like, what can I do? And sometimes just reach out. What does your community need? It may not be directly related to what it is that has you angry, but just get active. I know someone in local Jersey City community who is a chef. He's known as Chef Michael Anthony. He works on catering. Right? Catering. He works with Elliot and La Caja Puerto Rican food truck, and so he's known in the Jersey City community. And yesterday he went around in his food truck feeding the homeless.
Nice.
Thanksgiving.
Nice.
Yes. Applause.
Yes.
And so he put out a thank you today to everyone that participated, because he had a whole slew of volunteers. Apparently women, children, families came out and supported with donations and supplies and their time. Again, Michael Anthony is his name, Chef_Michael Anthony on Instagram. Fed the homeless yesterday in Jersey City for Thanksgiving right out of the food truck. La Caja Puerto Rican, Elliot, another, just stand-up guy who always shows up for the Puerto Rican community, and his wife. Also, 201 Cuisine.
Yes,
Jimmy.
yes.
She was shouted out. So was Trudy. She was shouted out, because they helped. So it was just really nice. Pudge and Chrissy were shouted out. These are all people that we know. They were all there. I myself couldn't make it. I had so many things going on as I prepare for the show that's happening next week. But again, I saw his thank you and I was really happy to see it, because just a couple days ago, he was venting to me about how frustrating it is to put together an event like this. You know, but again, that just speaks to the place that he's coming from. And so I just wanted to, and that's our local positive news, but I know that there's a lot more people just like him doing the same thing in other areas all across the globe. And so, you know,
that doesn't get talked about or mentioned. Yeah.
And so just like it's easy for us to come up with a list of topics, right? I was doing that. I came up with 14.
Nice.
And then trying to find the positive news. I had a hard time.
Yes.
I had a hard time. Yes. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to keep it positive for now, keep it local for now. But that's why I'm saying. It's
like, it's unfortunate, but like if you've ever been involved in like some type of survey or an assessment, and you get to a part where people ask you about, you know, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, or even on like a job interview type thing. It's like the weaknesses are like there. It's like, because I know, you know, unless you're just like in a fog, but you know, if you got some type of awareness, like the weaknesses pop up. And then when it comes down to the strengths, you may be able to just off the top of your head, get out one or two. Yeah. But when you hold the list together, it's like the weaknesses are like, and we have to like change that with ourselves. Well, I
think it's also because of how the media is set up.
Yeah.
You know, you turn on the news and they're telling the same 5 sad, tragic stories. They're not talking about the good stuff that happens, you know? And
that's why it's important for the positive notes.
And I really like to focus on the positive news that's happening right here in the hood, with us, our people, our communities. Look for it in your community. Is there.
Because there's people that will like for us to believe that that there's nothing going on. Like there's no, like people are not holding themselves accountable, that they're waiting for government handouts or whatever, and that there's no type of you know, the whole sense of community where the community,
or that they can't do anything for the community unless they sell out to a colonizer like Goya and take a handout from the colonizer like Goya.
Take it easy, because you're going to add another 30 minutes at least to this episode, and we were trying to wrap it up on a positive note.
So shout out to Michael Anthony.
Yes.
All the people from Jersey City and surrounding
201 Cuisine, Trudy.
Yes, and
Pudge.
And that you know, just did this wonderful, wonderful, awesome, beautiful thing. Look for this in your community, people, because it's out there. And there you go.
Yeah. And I'll also add, as we end, I don't know if, you know, I don't think we mentioned it last week, but we did include it, and which we will start and continue to include is in the podcast description, you'll find the links to articles that we've, you know, quoted from, or, you know, or just decided to, you know, speak about, like Michi just did. And also, you know, people that we shout out, we will at them or include their Instagram or whatever their primary socials are. So you can, you know, go and look into those people and their stories and their, you know, their different movements, you know, as well. You know, I know someone, just on the way over here, a good friend of ours that's a teacher, asked me for, you know, information on an article about the media literacy stuff. So, and that's another thing that I do personally with podcasts. I really appreciate going into the links, or in the YouTube videos that I watch, going into the links in the descriptions and then finding a whole bunch of sources, because then I could just dig into these things further. And which is just, that's just the nerd in me. I like, you know, that I've developed into. I really enjoy those things. So, another great, nice, smooth episode, more structured. We had our notes here, and, you know, we're not going to mention the difficulty trying to get it started, but the actual audio recording, the flow was amazing.
This is still very much a work in progress.
Yes.
We are like, you know, just learning and growing as we do this. So, you know, we appreciate the feedback and the listeners and the people that get excited about listening. And, you know, like I say, follow, like, share, comment, but most of all, listen.
You know, and real quick before we end, we'll just pretty much give a shout out to ourselves and highlight our socials. It's at WWIU on Instagram and Facebook. WWIU show on YouTube and SoundCloud. And as always, we are now official on all major podcast hosting platforms. That's Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher.
Google too?
Yeah, we've been on Google. We have, you know why? Because the Apple and Spotify, they kind of outshine, and Google isn't really known for their podcasts, but they do have their podcasts.
And if you like our page on Facebook, our podcast is linked to the Facebook page,
yes.
So you get a twofer.
Yes, so the podcast is also featured on the Facebook page now. So whenever we upload and release a new show on the other platforms, Facebook is one of those platforms now. Like we don't have to, upload it ourselves or add a link to it. It is part of the Facebook page now, and some of you've already noticed that because I've been seeing some activity on the Facebook page. Which
looking at the stats.
Yes, I'm looking at the stats. I'm developing into a technician, a podcast technician over here, doing my part. All right, so as always,
this is Michi.
And this is Scott.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for joining us. Peace.
Bye.